Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the much anticipated launch of Mobilogue 2.0. A special shout out to our virtual audience. Over 150 people have registered for Mobilogue 2.0, and over 50 people have already joined the webinar today. Mobilogs has been a cornerstone for discussions on critical urban mobility challenges. Today, we are excited to unveil Mobilog's experience, one that's even more dynamic, engaging, and impactful. Now, let's officially launch Mobilogs 2.0. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Manjunath Shekhar, Head Sumaka, for the opening address.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome on behalf of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and GIZ India. I extend a warm welcome to all of you. While the room is not looking as full as we would like it to, please be assured that there are quite a few participants online. And so there are a lot of people listening in today. Mobilogue's 2.0 is a step forward from the previous exercise that was done under Smart SUT, the previous bilateral project between GIZ and MoHUA. They opened up a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue on sustainable mobility measures that GIZ has been supporting Government of India on. And we're excited about taking this a step forward. And this time around, our focus will be air quality, climate action, accessibility. We will, of course, be looking at gender and digitalization as cornerstones to all our work, and therefore that'll be one of the things that we'll expect to deliver through this webinar series. We are excited about the lineup of experts, international, national, really game changers in their fields, policymakers, some of them in this room today, and we're excited to have them with us and to share their thoughts with us. So thank you all to our panelists. Thank you especially to Dr. Lohia for joining us and gracing this occasion. We also want to thank those who are with us online, those who've registered yet to join, those who will be joining us in person today. We look forward to the series. We will be having over 10 such webinars as part of 2.0. Later on, as part of the inaugural session, you'll also see some of the achievements from the previous exercise, and we hope to better those numbers this time. So yeah, having said that, we want to thank each one of you and welcome aboard. This is going to be an exciting journey. Thank you.
Now let's welcome Ms. Rana Amani, Technical Advisor GIZ, to introduce Sumaka and Mobilogues 2.0 in detail.
Very good afternoon, everyone. Sumaka is a Sustainable Urban Mobility, Air Quality, Climate Action and Accessibility project. This is a technical cooperation project commissioned by German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and it is under a Green Urban Mobility Partnership, which is between Government of India and Government of Germany. So Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India is the partner ministry for this, and GIZ is supporting them in implementing this project, and BMZ is the commissioning ministry. So the objective of this project is to enable national, state and municipal institutions to promote climate, environment friendly, low emission, and socially balanced urban mobility systems. Supporting the Green Urban Mobility Partnership is one of the component of this project. Other components are improving the scientific data collection on climate data protection, air quality, and control of access to mobility, implementing integrated mobility strategy plans to improve urban mobility in cities, improving capabilities of national, state, and local authorities for implementing of integrated mobility, including green recovery. The implementation period for this project is 3 years. It started in May 2022 and ending in April 2026. Commissioning party is BMZ and partner ministry is MAUA. So we have a total of 5 states and 9 cities within the project. These are the states. In Gujarat, we have Surat and Rajkot. In Karnataka, we have Mysore and Hubli Dharwad. Kerala, Kochi and Trivandrum. Odisha, Bhubaneswar, Rourkela. And Meghalaya from Northeast has recently been added to the project. So we have Shillong from there. These are the key thematic support areas under the project. So the main area is training and capacity building, data analytics, ITS, big data, road safety, inclusive mobility, reducing GHG emission, air pollution, active mobility, multimodal integration, public transport, technology advancement, peer-to-peer learning. And Sumaka activities are aligning with all these SDG sustainable development goals. The project indicators are to adopt global best practices and representing the project globally, develop strategies to promote sustainable and green mobility in partner cities, then develop national guidelines for air quality inventories, develop integrated mobility plans and capacity building. So these are supposed to be the project outcomes, that standardizing procedures and methodologies through evidence-based data collection, develop capacities of national, state, and urban bodies, integrating urban mobility strategies to improve overall air quality, climate action, climate impacts, and accessibility, reduce GHG emissions and fuel consumption by improving public transport systems, first mile and last mile connectivity, improving decision making and knowledge skills through capacity development. So under the project, the capacity building program is the major component, and we are implementing it with support of MAUA at the national level. So these are some problem statements we have. So from the Niti Aayog report on reforms in urban planning and capacity, it was mentioned that India aims at 500 healthy cities by 2030, but we have a dearth of urban planners in the country. States and cities TCP departments do not recruit urban and transport planners. And about 8,000 additional planners will be needed by 2030 if we have to achieve that aim. So urban transport, since it's a diverse sector, training needs to be given on upgradation, technological upgradations, logistics development, and cross-cutting topics. So we need to build the capacity of officials, not only government officials, but each and every individual related to the field, and a certain training content have been developed, and formal induction and refresher programs also exist in our program. Government of India has acknowledged the importance of capacity building and they have Center of Excellence established to impart these trainings in the future. Under our earlier sustainable smart SUT program, we have given capacity building trainings to more than 2,000 people under different training sessions, workshops, mentoring programs, study tours, and all. Out of these, 360 were women trainers and transgenders persons. 9,000 people were sensitized on topics related to sustainable urban transport through webinars and workshops, online mobilogues and lecture series, and 380 hours of trainings were provided. So this is the target and delivery mechanism for under Sumaka project. that we have to provide six direct action learning training for 600 beneficiaries and knowledge enhancement of 3,000 professionals through Mobilogues and other online courses. And the means are executive programs, short-term training programs, seminars and Mobilogues, e-learning courses, and study tools. Mobilogues, we started in our smart SUT project. That was also with Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and the word Mobilogue is derived from mobility plus dialogues. So we call it Mobilogues. So the aim was to sensitize participants on advances made in different domains in transportations and how they can be integrated into the cities. We trained 9,000 people under Smart SUT Mobilogues in 10 different technical sessions. And Mobilogue 2.0, we aim to be bigger and better. So as Manjunath said, we'll be having a series of 10 webinars, which will be focusing on different topics like climate change, active mobility, barrier-free movement, gender, living labs. And our aim is to make these webinars completely open and accessible for all people from all sectors and expertise. Thank you. With this, I hand over to Rishi again. Thank you.
Let's welcome Mr. Raghu Babu, Program Director, GIZ India, for keynote address.
Very good afternoon, all of you. Distinguished participants and experts and friends and colleagues from GIZ. Happy to be here today, and particularly happy to see the topic you chose for today. Today is the World Environment Day. Usually this day, I used to be in the field doing cleanup drives and plantation, but today we are here in this webinar. Happy to be part of this discussion. Particularly, you have chosen the topic of clean air and mobility, which is quite an important topic when it comes to air pollution. So I'm also responsible for the Clean Air project from GIZ, and we are supporting the National Clean Air Program. So I have some insights, and I can share a couple of aspects related to that in my talk today. Air pollution, all of us know that it is known to have health impacts on agricultural productivity, ecosystem, and environment. Health consequences are quite severe. There is a lot of data about how many deaths air pollution can cause. And air pollution is something that has been a major concern as a part of our city development. There have been a lot of efforts from the Ministry of Environment. They brought the National Clean Air Program in 2019. And since then, they put in efforts in several sectors. Transport and mobility are two of the priority mitigation sectors listed in the National Clean Air Program. And I'm happy to see that you have also positioned this Mobilogues today in that way to put these two together. Mobility sector, the transport sector, is known to cause something like 25% of the PM 2.5 in the cities, which is significant. So I'm not talking about the other emissions that come from the vehicles. So this is a significant part. The number of interventions have been stated in the National Clean Air Program, be it on e-mobility, green mobility. Green mobility more, they're talking about green fuels or clean fuels. E-mobility is more electric mobility. And they're talking about land use planning, an integrated approach towards integrating the mobility with overall master plans and land use plans, and so on. So we see, as per statistics, I was part of, incidentally, drafting the national land use policy, and we saw that the urbanization is something that's going to go on since we do not really have intensive land use plans and regulations, controls. So currently from 30% rural urban population to 70% rural population, by 2050, they're expecting 50% population living in cities. So the cities are going to grow. And that's what we are seeing. And at the moment, since there are no other interventions, this is expected to continue in this manner as per the data that we have. This means these will become economic backbones. There are many cities which are becoming economic generators, and they're creating the momentum for economic generation. And the cities will grow. They attract more and more people for jobs and for livelihood and for all the other things. But with that comes all the other requirements, and transport is one of those that will be one of the first ones to come in, because you need mobility of people and goods. And there's a lot of goods movement these days besides people movement. And especially after the COVID times, we have seen how much of e-commerce has come into the cities, and which requires a huge infrastructure. And we have seen in the recent times, people like to deliver within 8 minutes or 10 minutes to your homes, and that would also need a lot of infrastructure. So everything is having directly or indirectly links to air pollution in terms of transportation. And that's where I think it's important that we discuss about it and find different solutions. So as a part of the Indo-German cooperation, which is existing for more than 60 years, we have of late, in 2019, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the German side, BMZ, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, came into an agreement, signed a joint declaration of intent on green and urban mobility partnership. And both countries said in this partnership agreement, they would like to work more intensively together to make the transport systems. They would like to achieve more sustainable transport systems and transform the urban transport systems through more efficient, people-centric, and low-carbon mobility solutions. I think that's well phrased. That means a lot more things can be done in that. And this particular project that you heard about right now is a part of that. So besides the green and besides the SUMACA project, which is sustainable urban mobility, air quality, climate action, and accessibility, SUMACA. Besides this, we have 25 more ongoing technical cooperation projects related to energy, related to fuels, transport, freight, and so on. So there are quite a lot of them. So what we realized is, while we deal with solutions in the transport sector, we should go for integrated solutions. This means we do not address just the sector, but also look at associated elements. For example, renewable energy systems are an integral part if you are talking about recharging infrastructure, for example. Skilling is an important component in achieving the overall sustainability. Your land use planning, your master plans, the way they are developed, are relevant more, not only for transport, even for clean air. So they're all interrelated. So we think from GIZ side, and that was an effort for us to look at what are all the urban mobility related projects, and we found 27 projects that work on different components, and we thought it's only wiser for us to bring them all together. And we are not stopping at that. We're also looking at, can we make partnerships and alliances with agencies that work on the similar topics and the similar outcomes. And we have seen that there are multiple organizations, both national, international, bilaterals, multilaterals, who work on the topics. And I think it's also wise for us to look around, who are all those agencies? How can we bring them all together? Now, digitalization is one other aspect which is being strongly promoted, because that makes life easier for us. Even the webinar, I think it was much better that a lot of people can join us, don't have to travel here, and at least they contribute to lesser pollution than what we have maybe cost by traveling to this place. Yeah, so that's in the lines of these integrated solutions. In May 2022, Prime Minister India and Chancellor Germany signed Green and Sustainable Development Partnership, GSTP. And they vouched from the German side 10 billion euro until 2030. And in this joint declaration on Green and Sustainable Development Partnership, both countries agreed to intensify cooperation and achieve climate change targets and SDGs. And in this has two important components: green mobility and sustainable urban development. And so that's some. So the framework exists, at least from the German Development Cooperation, to intensify efforts and take the learnings from Germany back to India. And I'm hoping that as we go by, we work more intensively. And we're also aiming that when you have cooperation with any agencies like GIZ or elsewhere, we need also to make sure that our efforts are mainstreamed into Government of India's programs and schemes, because they are the ones who have that infrastructure, organizational infrastructure, institutional frameworks, legal frameworks, and the financial frameworks. So it will be very crucial for all of us to work in tandem that we can achieve the desired impacts in a much better way. One other thing will be also to look at the resource and expert pools that we have in the country. I think there are multiple organizations who are working on various aspects. Some are working on the research, some are working on implementation, some are working on monitoring. And I think it's very important for us to get everybody together and work on that. Just to give an example, in the case of Clean Air, National Clean Air Program, there are 131 cities, 8 ministries, multiple state departments, 28 state pollution control boards involved. And imagine how complex it would be for all of them to work together. And through digitalization, now everything is online. So they're getting approvals online, they're reporting online, you can look at the data online. I think this is also something very crucial to arrange for collaborative efforts and the associated techniques and methods to enable that collaboration, that we can synchronize our efforts to get the maximum results and impacts for the beneficiaries. Yeah, so these are some of my key points that I wanted to tell you, that we need to maybe change the way we worked 10 years back to get the maximum out of our efforts. It's a collaborative effort, all of us going together. That was my key message for today, that these are two interrelated, clean air and mobility, and these all need to be worked well coordinated, well synced, and the people will be the first beneficiaries right away, and you will be able to see the tangible results on ground. Yeah, and thank you all organizers for this Mobilogue series. And Mahua has been our long-standing partner. We have a lot of portfolio with Mahua. We are thankful to Mahua for being a strong partner for GIZ all these years. And we're looking forward for more efforts in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now let's welcome Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Lohia, Senior Advisor at the World Bank, to share the special address. He was also ex-OSD and ex-officio Joint Secretary Urban Transport at Government of India.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this important Mobilogue 2.0 launch today on an important day, World Environment Day. I was just hearing the project director GIZ of all the collaborative effort which GIZ is doing with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and I was reminded of all the initiatives that Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs launched when the Sustainable Urban Transport Project was taken up with World Bank and JEF and UNDP. So I think when we talk of clean air, sustainable mobility, etc., environment, as you all know, 28% of greenhouse gas emission is through the transport sector. And as urbanization is growing, the need for mobility is also growing because we have a younger population as well. So per capita trip rate in urbanization, in a population which is younger, so you will have more, I would say, needs of travel. He mentioned the increased need of the e-commerce, especially after COVID. So I think there is a lot of need for movement, and that all needs to be, when we are rapidly urbanizing, going up from 31% in 2011, exact numbers we do not have because we didn't have the census in 2021. But the numbers are growing, and we will be adding the urban population, which we added in last 100 years, in next maybe 25, 30 years. So that is the kind of growth that is going to happen. And if we do not grow in a sustainable manner, we will be doomed. So we are committed to net zero by 2070 as per COP26. So a lot of things need to be done, and I'm very happy that GIZ is working with the ministry. When it comes to Mobilogues, dialogues, capacity building, I think we are still just at the baby steps. I was just having a discussion with Sarika while the session was to start. Why people cannot make good footpaths. So even a simple thing like a footpath, this was also being discussed in the high-level committee on urbanization. So pedestrianization and walkability. So even a subject like walkability, it is such an intense subject which, unless until we go into all the details, it will be neglected, and the results would be that we'll have some footpaths which are not walkable, which are not safe, which are not usable by majority of the population. I'm happy that the focus on the gender sensitiveness is also being done as part of the Mobilogues. So many times, a lot of things which are developed, we do not see that whether females, children, older people, any physically challenged persons, will they be able to negotiate that or not. So essentially, we are not catering for more than 50% of the population. We cater for only the young male population. So that is the tragedy of the planning and implementation that is being happening at most of the places. And to that extent, I think the capacity building efforts and the Mobilogues, which is required for different levels of, I would say, because when you are doing capacity building would be required at various levels, right from the people, those who are at the helm of the affairs, who are making the policies, who are deciding the projects, who are doing the budget allocation, to the people, those who are doing the implementation. So I'm sure as part of the Mobilogues, you will have those kind of toolkits or whatever training programs you have developed for different audience, because the capsule might be same, the knowledge might be same, but how it is to be communicated might be required in a different fashion when you communicate with different levels. Because the attention span might be shorter if you are talking to somebody who is a policymaker, but at the same time, you must drive the key message in a very short time without losing the context. If you go into too many of details there, so you will lose the interest. But at the same time, a consultant who is there, who is doing the designing, who is going to work on the ground, so there you need to have the detailing as well. So I think I'm sure as part of those Mobilogues toolkit training programs which you have developed, so you would have taken care of those things. I wish the entire GIZ team all the very best in taking this dialogue forward. There's a huge requirement with this increased focus on e-mobility. I think there's another area of focus which needs to be catered besides all the other means, right from pedestrianization to public transport and various modes of public transport which you might be focusing on. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Loya, for your kind words and support. Now we have a short video to share a glimpse into Mobilogues 2.0. before we move on, we have quick poll questions for you. Request you all to please scan the QR code shown on the screen and participate. For the virtual participants, we've also shared the link on the chat. Thank you everyone for your participation. We see that people feel here that creating a robust public transport system can help us reduce air pollution and congestion. Let's move on to our inaugural session now. Today's theme is Greening Urban Transport Strategies for Clean Air. We will be delving into critical topics like national decarbonization strategies, low emission zones, the health impacts of pollution, and the future of freight electrification. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Jagan Shah, CEO, Infravision Foundation, to deliver his presentation setting the context for our discussion today. Jagan Shah is an architect and urbanist with extensive experience in India's infrastructure development. He co-conceived India's Smart Cities mission and played a key role in shaping policies for sustainable urban growth.
Good afternoon. I thought I'd take my position as the moderator of the panel discussion because that's what I'm here for. Not really to make an extensive presentation, but Rana suggested that I do have some context-setting slides which I have put together. So just give me a moment for the slides to come up. Yeah, so the focus of our panel discussion is going to be, well, it's not a single focus, but we're going to talk about four main things. First is the opportunities and challenges of low emission zones, and we'll talk about what low emission zones constitute. National level strategies for decarbonization of transport. That's the broader sort of context, and especially because of the linkages of the program with the ministry, we have to take cognizance of those system-changing initiatives of the government. We're looking at freight electrification, and one of the panelists will focus a lot on that as well. And the health impacts of pollution, which I think is going to be something which underlies all of the efforts of each of the panelists who are going to speak today. So that's really a cross-cutting or horizontal issue. So I just put together one slide each on each of those four, just to actually just as provocations. Really, these are not sort of thematic or really determining the course of our conversation, but some thoughts to start people, thinking about it, especially all the 77 people who are online and not with us in this room, can perhaps jot down a few thoughts of their own, which then the panelists might be able to address later in their question and answer session. When we talk about low emission zones, one of the important aspects is that the efficient regulation of vehicular pollution is a prerequisite for creating low emission zones. So the creation of a zone without an ecosystem where you're able to actually regulate emissions, for that matter, regulate other aspects of transportation as well, is a futile exercise. So the zone, in some sense, is a crystallization of multiple and multidimensional efforts. So it's not about creating low emission zones as being the first step. It's really a low emission zone becomes, in a sense, the result of and the outcome of efforts that address the entire ecosystem. In the Indian context, municipal corporations have actually extensive powers. The most important power of the corporation is that they have sort of unquestioning ability to impose regulations on the streets and the open spaces of the city. They don't always exercise those powers, but nevertheless, they do have the powers. But one of the tricky aspects of managing streets and open spaces, as well as all the infrastructure that we relate with transportation and mobility, is right-of-way. Now, right-of-way is a term that we use when we talk about the width of a road, but right-of-way is essentially, conceptually, the permission that a municipality will grant to a vehicle, a cable, a pipe, whatever technology is needed for infrastructure to actually be installed in a city or for it to be operated on the streets of the city. That is a tricky aspect, both in terms of both in terms of the process that goes into granting right-of-way, the assumption that we have when we own a vehicle that we have right-of-way, which is not actually a well-founded assumption, and the fact that many vehicles are exempt from that regulation as well. So just as you see at toll plazas, that long list of people who are allowed to go through without paying a toll, likewise, right-of-way is assumed to be granted to many special vehicles. And how do you manage to create clean air zones where we are able to actually balance this sort of regulatable and unregulatable traffic? The second provocation is about the second sort of bullet point, which is decarbonization of transport. Now, here again, we do need to take into cognizance the fact that what we usually mean when we say decarbonizing of transport is essentially the operational aspects of transport. And what we are focusing on now are efforts to shift the energy sources which are used to move vehicles and people. Now, that is only one part of the decarbonization. So using the word decarbonization is something we should do with great caution, and we should do it in a measured way, understanding that it's a far more complex phenomenon than is represented by any one sector like transportation. Vehicle manufacturing, of course, there is now the mandate to upgrade continuously in terms of emissions from vehicles, which is great. India has some of the best standards in the world. We're not taking into account what goes into the actual manufacture of vehicles or goes into the making of roads, for that matter, on which transport actually moves, or the rails on which it moves, and such like. So we're not looking at what are called scope 2, scope 3 kinds of emissions. The modal shift strategies are being pursued concurrently, but not integrated with electrification. And I think that's something we must all be cognizant of. These are happening almost in parallel. if they meet, they can have a much bigger impact. And we should aim for that kind of impact. Decarbonization will require systemic solutions. And I think what the entry point we get through these Mobilogues into talking about decarbonization of transport is only an entry point. And I think we should keep expanding our engagement in this sector to address other aspects. The third provocation is about the third bullet point, which was freight electrification or electrification of freight. Now, on this, thought that comes to mind is that the entire logistics value chain needs greening. So a massive challenge in itself, massive literally in terms of the numbers of what you're talking about in terms of vehicles, the spread, the spatial distances that we're talking about. And it includes regulation of vehicles originating outside city limits. And that poses another problem. So when we say that we are going to take care of the environmental impact of transportation in cities, and clean air zones is one way of doing it. Well, the zone, until it becomes what London has created, which is to cover the entire city with a low emission zone or ultra low emission zones as well. That is a very evolved state. For us to get to that point, we need to be able to address what I said earlier, which is that the entire ecosystem has to be regulated in order for us to then create those zones. And what you find in cities like Berlin and London, where this has actually happened, is that they have a well-regulated ecosystem for transportation, which enables the creation of things like low-emission zones. Freight electrification in that context, we need to pay special attention to synchronizing the scrapping of old vehicles in adjacent states. This is linked to the first bullet point, which is that if your polluting vehicle is originating outside, what do you do about that? And it may well do, because from Delhi, we may have scrapped the vehicle in Delhi, but it's gone to Haryana or it's gone to other states and is entering Delhi thereafter. Now, for many of the experts in the room, this is a well-known fact, but I think for the larger conversation, let's make sure that we address this aspect. A good thing is that the businesses related now with transportation, which are operators of cab services, the e-commerce operators, I think Raghu also mentioned e-commerce. These aspects actually open huge grounds, because the public sector is only operating a fraction of the vehicles that you're trying to actually regulate. So in some fundamental sense, working through governments is only one aspect we need to address. We need to look at the private sector, and the private sector actually innovates faster. So if cabs are electrical, e-commerce vehicles, two-wheelers, such like, have already, I think, been adopted as electrical, can we then work with those companies to actually make sure that they're decarbonizing their entire operations? And that can achieve a lot of change at scale. And the last provocation is really about the health impacts of pollution, something I'm particularly, I guess I get agitated about, because we have lost, in Delhi we've lost 8 years of our lifespan according to some data, and we don't seem to be particularly bothered by that. But having said that, we do need to recognize some aspects of this, which maybe I think will feed into future conversations in Mobilogues. One, of course, is the obvious problem, which is silos in government are preventing decisive action. And in Delhi, we have a fairly well-empowered committee that is trying to fix things. But as you know, the results of all of those efforts, despite the amount of power given to that committee, are still not, cleaning the air. There is an impasse created because the scientific basis for establishing responsibility is not accepted as the sole basis for action. And this is one might even call it a cultural change that needs to happen, which is that science dictates action. And in this area of work, you have to apply science. Transportation is fundamentally a scientific ecosystem or a scientific phenomenon. So source apportionment studies in particular, I have not seen in at least I have not personally seen any evidence of them being endorsed and accepted by those who are identified as the sources. Now, unless they do that, they will always have that, in Hindi we call it a patli gali. They will always have that little escape route to say, well, this data we don't accept this data. But that's an untenable situation. So we've got to start working on health impacts. We must have everybody accept the data and say, well, okay, I'm part of this problem in one dimension, and I can fix my little piece of the puzzle. Until that happens, we will have the situation like the pollution control boards, who unfortunately are the sole watchdogs, but they are, in a sense, inadequate. I think the word I've used is inappropriate. Probably that's the wrong word. Inadequate for addressing health impacts. PCBs are not going to be able to impose the kinds of shift that is necessary in attitudes in all departments that are contributing to the health impacts. And my last point is that, of course, the NCAP support for monitoring infrastructure is welcome, but again, insufficient. It's good that the pollution control boards are testing out digital devices. The ministry has asked them to do so. That's fantastic. I've seen that work very well in Andhra Pradesh. And I think we have to expand the universe of data that is available for us to understand the health impacts better. Sorry for taking longer than I thought. And that's the end of my presentation. And with that, I have the great pleasure of inviting my group of panelists to the stage. Let me do that first by inviting Anumita. Anumita, welcome. Please join us on stage. I'll quickly also introduce Anumita while she is joining us. Anumita Roy is Executive Director of the Center for Science and Environment India. And she will be, according to this introduction, she'll be focusing on the health impacts, but I'm sure she will speak about a number of other aspects as well. She has spearheaded significant campaigns, including the Right to Clean Air, and has been recognized with the 2017 Hagen-Smith Clean Air Award. So, welcome, Anumita. Can I next invite Amit Bhatt, Managing Director of ICCT India. Amit has over 20 years of experience and brings expertise in transportation, urban development, and management. Amit, welcome. And next, I will invite Sharif Kamar, Associate Director of Transport and Urban Governance, TERI, to explore the topic of freight electrification. Sharif has 14 years of experience in transport research covering public transportation, EVs, emissions, and urban governance projects. And last but not the least, let me invite Mr. Raghu Babu. Sorry to bring you in last, but I think it's important for us to welcome our other guests first in the Indian tradition. So welcome, please join us. And I don't need to introduce Raghu Babu. So with that, let me also invite our presenters and panelists to maybe start with their presentations, and then we'll engage in a discussion. So can I invite Amit to present first? Amit, yeah? Would you like to go there and do the presentation? Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Jagan. Very quickly, I think both Sharif and I are covering probably the same topic, but I will be looking at more from the heavy-duty vehicle side, and I think Sharif will look at more from the light-duty and the city-level side. And the reason why we thought it's important to address this is, I think we are still not understanding the severity of the need for cleaning freight. Because if you look at the Menti poll which was done, where we were asking people what are the best strategies to clean air? And the 4 options that were there was, one was on looking at land use transport integration, second was on public transport, third was walking and cycling, and fourth was on electrification of personal vehicle. We have missed cleaning of freight, which is very important. So why are we talking about it? And these are some numbers which have come from the global scenario, is that if we are not able to do anything in a business as usual scenario, transport emissions are going to grow multifold in the coming next 25, 30 years. And whatever benefits that we will get from reduction that will happen in the West because of technology advancement, all of it will be offset by the rise in emission that will come from transport in the emerging economies. And therefore, it is important and very important to look at transport sector emission from the climate change side, but also from the public health side. And Shivani is here, and we have been talking about looking at transport emission for Delhi specifically. And if you look at the number, the source apportionment study, the largest contributor for particulate matter in Delhi is trucks, medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles. So it's also important. Second, what we miss in this slide is what's the relative share of various modes of transport. And I'm not sure if this slide is visible, but what you see on the top of the dotted chart is emission from the respective vehicle categories. So the pink one is 2 and 3 wheeler, that's roughly about 16-17%. Then you have cars, about 25%. Then you have buses and trucks. So if you include bus, trucks, and medium commercial vehicles, that's roughly about 55-60% of the emission. And if you include trucks alone, that's about 45 to 50% of emission. And that's very important. But on the pie chart, if you look at the absolute number of trucks in the overall modal mix, roughly about 2%. So you have 2% of motor vehicle fleet that is roughly responsible for about half of emission. That is the severity of the problem, and we have to look at what do we do. So one way of looking at it, and this is something we have come up recently, is to understand life cycle emission. So when we were grappling with this problem, we said, how do you clean then truck emission? And so we said, let's look at life cycle. One, whatever emission happens in terms of production of these vehicles, the production of the energy sources, the use of the vehicle, and at the end of the life of the vehicles, and then come up with what powertrain technologies can deliver on cleaning these systems. And I'll show you some results that we came, and these are very recent publications of ours. And what we concluded from this analysis is that there are only 2 technologies and this is the result for a tractor trailer in India, heavy duty vehicles, is that in terms of reduction, we can only get this reduction from 2 technologies, battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. No other technology promises to deliver this reduction. And even with the current grid, which is a 2023 scenario, these vehicles are cleaner. But as you start cleaning the grid, which is a 2030 scenario and 2040 scenario, which we'll share later on, these emissions go even further south. So what we concluded was that we have to look at electrification of these form factors very closely. We also did some analysis with rigid trucks, not a tractor trailer, but the rigid trucks. And again, the numbers are very, very similar in terms of what it can deliver. We also looked at bus, because that is also an important part of the heavy duty vehicle fleet. And again, the numbers are very similar. The only difference is that we also looked at CNG. And we found that if you look at the methane leakage that happens both upstream and downstream, CNG may not turn out to be a very good fuel from the public health, from the climate change perspective. Yes, it has a benefit from the public health perspective. But now we have technologies which are even more, which offer much greater benefit, and therefore electrification becomes a very important tool to look at. Then we also looked at what happens when we start looking at grids which are cleaner in nature. And again, the numbers only improve. So what does it mean for us? Especially now that we have been talking about Viksit Bharat 2047, we also have a net zero target of 2070. And what you see over here is that if you look at the estimate, so India is poised to grow from $3 trillion economy to about roughly $30 trillion economies in next 25 years or so, which means our demand for freight will also increase. And then we have a net zero target of 2070. So the line that you see on the top is a business as usual scenario, which means the emissions are going to rise further. What you see the dotted line over here is that if we bring in all the technology available on improvement of ICE technologies, there will be reduction, but the reduction will still be more than the base value. So the absolute reduction will not be lower than the current emission norms. It will still be higher than the current emission norms. And then if you look at the net zero target, which is rapid electrification, you will see a massive reduction. And then if you bring in some ambitious policy scenario, we can see much more massive reductions coming in. And this is for tank to wheel. We also have well to wheel analysis in terms of complete life cycle. And you can see the reduction potential these technologies can offer. So what does it mean for India? Couple of things before I conclude. One, the zero emission trucking is growing rapidly around the world, and we have some countries around the world, we have come up with 100% zero emission targets, which includes a very significant portion of target on heavy duty vehicles. So the technology is now rising, and that is something which is very important for us to know. The big barrier is in terms of cost. Right now, the cost can be anywhere between 2.5 to 3 times than conventional vehicle. And what this analysis was, if we bring in subsidies like we offer in case of buses, the total cost of ownership becomes much more favorable for electric trucks in India. And we did this analysis for looking at Delhi. If Delhi has to kind of bring in electric trucks, what kind of subsidies are we looking at? So that's one part to start the initial discussion. But what we have realized is that we need 5 main policy drivers to push for a massive ZET transition. And while we are working on incentives, and hopefully the next round of FAME will come, will offer some incentives for trucks as well. There is a need for charging infrastructure as well, and there is a lot of demand aggregation which is also happening. But 2 important policy targets which we have not really looked at in terms of electrification that we should is a target of, one is on targets. So a lot of economies have come up with certain ZEV sales target, supply requirement which is there, but also in terms of overall phasing out target for electric vehicles that is required, which we hope will come with the new government taking shape in the coming days. Now, what it also means is that these policies will have to cut across, because we are looking at integration of transport with energy. And so the question is, who bears the cost of utility? Who bears the cost of actual fuel? Who bears the cost of operation? That is something that we'll have to work out very closely. And I think, Jagan, as we know that we have been talking about land use transport integration for a very long time, and we are still struggling. But this will require land use transport and energy integration. And that really changes, increase the complexity of the sector. But again, we believe that if we have to reach that net zero target of 2070, we cannot reach that target unless we make clean our transport system. And we have to, if we have to clean our transport system, we have to clean the medium and heavy duty trucks as a priority segment. Yeah, so with this, I'll end my talk, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you very much. Let me move next to Anumita. Anumita, can I invite you to make your presentation?
So, thank you, Jagan. And when I, so is it visible? Yes. Right. So when I had this conversation with you, so my mandate was very specific. Is Clean Air Action or National Clean Air Program working for vehicular pollution or not, right? And I'll try and answer that. So, and also in the context of health impact, because what is the most important challenge for us right now is that air pollution is a public health emergency. And over a period of time, there has been mountain of, if you look at the way evidences have actually exploded, they're defining that what are the very serious risks associated with breathing of toxic air. And there are many, and if I really look at the range of evidences, one coming from all the estimates that happen for global burden of disease, and therefore you know that air pollution is the top killer in the country, about 1.6 million deaths happening every year. You now also have medical evidences to associate and link air pollution with damage to each and every organ in the body. And as a result, you see a whole plethora of diseases from diabetes to hypertension to stroke to cancer, you just name it. And you also have additional evidences because often the numbers that we put out, they don't really make much sense to people. And that's why this kind of graphics becomes so important, the photos that become so important from the medical community, where they're not only looking at how dirty our lungs are, which they can show publicly to people, but even counting the biomarkers in our sputum, in our blood, to show how much our body is under stress because of air pollution. So clearly what we have established very well, that air pollution has huge health impacts. But the challenge is, how do we position vehicles in this debate? And Jagan, when you said that we have source apportionment studies today, which is good, that the science is emerging to tell us more precisely where the pollution is coming from, and it's important to know that. But when you begin to map that, we still have to understand it in a pie chart of 100%. And if you have 12 to 13 sources of pollution in your city, nothing can be more than 10%, 20%, 13%. Like here you see it is an inventory done for the Indo-Gangetic Plain states, okay? And if you look at the relative contribution of vehicles, it's all 13, 12, 10. And that becomes a problem. So we are bringing out science without deepening the understanding of what it means. And as a result, we see everyone fighting with everyone. So everyone says, I'm a small pie in the pie chart, so please don't bother me. And that's what has been happening. That has been the flashpoint with the industry. And that is what is used. Instead of using science to strengthen your position, you're using the science to dilute position. So what do we do? So first of all, we really have to demystify that how to understand the risk from vehicular pollution. Now, what is interesting that when you look, first of all, vehicles are emerging, even if 15%, 20%, but they're still emerging as second or third top polluter in most cities of India. But it is more important to understand that when you're looking at the combined contribution of combustion sources, because often the inventory and source apportionments are dominated by dust. And India and the South Asia will always have very high impact of dust. And therefore, to say that it is dust that is more important than combustion sources, we are really underwriting the risk. So we have to understand that it's not only the primary emissions, but also not just the particulate matter that is coming directly from the tailpipe, but also the gases from the tailpipe, once they're out in the air, form secondary particulates and add hugely. So if you look at Delhi's source apportionment study, especially during winter, the secondary particulates can be as high as about 26 to 30%. That's huge. So that means it's just not the particulates, it's also the gases, and you have to address all the combustion sources. And therefore, in Delhi today, having done a lot of things, but on a day-to-day basis, now much better estimations are available for Delhi when we can find out real-time how different sources are contributing by the hour to the air quality. In Delhi, vehicles are turning out to be almost 50% of the local pollution problem. But to understand the risk, now science is increasingly pointing towards the importance of looking at exposure rather than only concentration, the ambient concentration. And if you look at the Health Effect Institute study and others, in fact, Health Effect Institute study is saying that the maximum impact of vehicular pollution is up to 500 meters from roadside. And think about it from the planning perspective and how important it is to build that into your planning. So, and then they applied that to Delhi to find that 55% of Delhi's 17, 18 million population actually live within 500 meters from some roadside. So it's enormous. The most important that Ministry of Health, when they for the first time looked at air pollution and health in 2015, and they came up with the report, they made this distinction very clearly. And they said when you look at a source apportionment, vehicles may look less and say power plants may look higher, but but keep in mind that power plants are at the periphery of the city, much away from our nostrils. But the vehicles are right under our nose. Therefore, your exposure levels will be huge. And the example from Chennai was that if vehicles contribute about 45% of the PM in Chennai, but if you look at it from the exposure perspective, exposure apportionment, then it increases to 63%. And that's the point that we really need to keep in mind. Now, while this kind of science is kind of been on for a long time, but now very recently new studies are emerging to show the health cost and health benefit of active transportation. For a long time, we were limiting our research to tailpipe and the emissions. But now to look at the value of active transportation, including WHO, and they are actually calculating in different parts of the world that if you increase your active mobility, walking and cycling, how life expectancy goes up, premature deaths come down. And very interesting that in the US cities that have implemented TOD policies, there they have shown that with that they have achieved weekly recommended levels of physical activity. So when we count our walking steps, for instance, right? So TOD will create what they call a TOD culture, and which is going to be a much healthier life that we need to focus on. So if we understand all this, the question is that is clean air action addressing mobility crisis and vehicular pollution? So first I'll give you one quick example from Delhi, where the action is much more evolved than the other cities, even though Delhi action we will always say is not enough. But having said that, if you look at the way Delhi has tried to address vehicular pollution, the focus has largely been on technology pathways. So whether CNG transition, acting on diesel vehicles, acting on trucks. In fact, all the measures taken on trucks today in Delhi, it has kind of converted Delhi into a low emission zone for trucks. So you have an RFID and pay something to enter Delhi. So these are the genesis of some of the area approach to dealing with air pollution. What is interesting is that having implemented all of these, which are very technology oriented, and question is then, is it helping? So this, along with other measures and other sources, we know that overall ambient concentration in Delhi is coming down, even though it's still very high. But we have bent the pollution curve. But for vehicles, what is primary objective? Has this led to any energy transition in the vehicle sector or not? So it's very interesting that yes, if you look at all the impact of the action taken on diesel, and I'm not reading out what those action is, but the combined impact shows that the high-speed diesel consumption in Delhi has reduced by about 46% between 2014 and 2023. So that means that if that diesel is quite reduced. Also, share of diesel cars have dropped from 35% in 2015 to just 7% in 2023. Now, question is, this is the kind of evidence we need to look for when we are looking at impact of clean air action in all other cities. So is it really leading to massive technology transition and energy transition in the sector or not? That has to be the benchmark and the bottom line. So from that perspective, the question is NCAP working for other cities, 132 cities that we are talking about? Now, NCAP, it's designed very well-intentioned. You have a target, 40% reduction, and you also have a matrix, and you also have a fund that is performance-linked. So you have to perform, you have to show improvement, and then you source the fund, and that is supposed to act as a carrot and stick. Now, the challenge here is that for the strength of that metrics to work, it has to be a proper one. But currently, what they are judging is the reduction in PM10. Now, PM10 is a coarser particle. Most of it is dust, and therefore it is not strong enough to drive action for combustion sources, including vehicles. Now, you also have a Swachh Vayu Survekshan, which is ranking cities based on action. So there is NCAP and 15 Finance Commission funding, which is ranking cities based on whether they have improved PM10 or not. Whereas Swachh Vayu Survekshan is ranking them based on what action have you taken. It's very interesting, the two doesn't match often. So those who have been incentivized for reducing PM10 may not be the topper for taking action. So if you cannot match the action with improvement in air quality, and that's going to be tougher for PM10, because PM10 can be influenced hugely by weather, atmospheric conditions, your dust events. So it's like you're incentivizing for something and without relating to action, and which may not be anything at the end of the day. So as a result, when we looked at the data that where this huge amount of funding that has come in from 15 Finance Commission, how are we spending it? It's showing more than 63% or 64% has gone for road building, the dust sweeping, and buying mechanical sweeping machines. Because if PM10 is the focus, then that's where you're going to put your money. Now, so this is and even less than 1% for the industry, and very little for vehicles, but that vehicles also, when you break it down, yes, few corridors of walking and cycling here and there, or multi-level car parks. Now the question is that, in the last segment, that CBCB has actually given indicators to the states and the cities to report their progress on each sector, on each source, every 3 months. And if you look at the indicators given to the cities to report, one is related to technology, PUC, electric vehicle, etc. But look at the indicators for public transport, NMT, and parking. Now, you can improve it, but still the fact that they're actually asking them to introduce new bus system, whether they're improving their GPS tracking, ETVM services, route plans. So it's not, so some thought has gone into it. And similarly for NMT and parking, they're actually saying that you have to report on the kilometer of walking and cycling created per certain kilometer of roads, right? Now imagine if all these indicators, if a city can actually show progress every quarter on each of these, we should have seen the transformation by now. But clearly that is not happening, and modal share is slipping all the time. Bus ridership is going down in all cities. So what is the missing link? So the missing link clearly is that all these indicators, and these indicators that are also backed by policies, because transportation policies have evolved quite a bit in India, but they don't get translated into the actual processes in the departments. And so in fact, we find that in all the progress reports, especially on the Prana portal, where they put it up, the information on transportation is minimal, mobility and transportation indicators. And the transport sector strategies, they are not well developed, not well quantified, and the quality indicators are also very weak. And the mainstreaming is becoming to be a huge problem. And so they have not adequately adopted state-level guidelines, benchmarks, service-level benchmarks, because what else will define the scope of transport action? It is not enough to say improve bus transport, unless the departments actually say, I'm going to improve my bus transport in this manner. So even though you have MOHUA's service-level benchmark, but none of them get integrated with the SOPs or the business rules of the departments. So that's where the very big, and the ULBs do not pay adequate attention. They never prioritize these sectors when the ULB funds come, and therefore they are never, so these indicators, and the indicators related to travel demand management, like parking policy has been asked for, but they don't understand the demand management principles. So they go for supply management, and they report on multi-level car parks. So fine, so none of these things happen, even though we know that in Delhi, Clean Air Action Plan has actually now moved the whole narrative towards area plans. So all the parking rules and the need for parking management area plans, these are the first steps towards introducing area plans in Delhi. And that's what we really now need to scale up across. And there is a very recent Supreme Court directive as well as the Air Commission directive for Delhi and NCR, actually that by August this year, they should be implementing their parking management area plans. Now, but we do not know whether there is an understanding of this also or not. And GIZ, that was the first time I saw that when you actually leverage in Bhubaneswar the clean air fund that has come to create low emission zone. So the whole thing that you have the Lingaraj temple. So clearly now what it's showing that instead of saying walking cycling infrastructure separately, parking management separately, it is time to integrate all these strategies as part of the area plan, and that it needs to be brought into your clean air action plan. So that's where we need to go, and the policies that seek transit-oriented development policy, we already have these policies. Like in Delhi, Delhi is already creating 12 TOD zones, but they never get reported in when they show progress. So they do not even know whether this is a part of clean air action or not. So we need much more alignment. And so we have to align the mobility policies for clean air action, for technology transformation, for benchmarks for integrated, connected, reliable public transport, walking, cycling, area plans, and demand management measure. But then finally, you have to enable measurable improvement under clean air program. So this is the next level of transition that we are all hoping will happen in the NCAP, that NCAP should get further strengthened, and we should be able to develop all targets, benchmarks, protocol for mainstreaming of the clear indicators of what mobility management means at the ULB level and all the concerned departments who need to do that. Performance need to be linked, the funding needs to be linked and aligned with all these indicators and benchmarks, and all the sectoral fundings need to be aligned to be able to deliver on clean air objective. And repurpose funding from the action that is locking in more carbon, more pollution. So with this, I think, so that's the point that I really want to make, that clean air action plan, so we have the framework with us, but we still have to go a long way to make it work for the combustion sources where the real health risks are. Thank you.
Thanks, Anumita. Thank you very much. Rana, I hope you're realizing what Mobilogues is going to be like after this. Yeah, we've only just started with 2 presentations. Let me quickly also move on then to request Mr. Raghu Babu to make your presentation, and we'll come to Sharif last.
All right, I'll take you to the low emission zone approach. Anumita, you rightly mentioned, this is low emission zone is an area-wide approach, putting everything together in one place instead of going on a sectoral line and not being able to see what comes out of it at the end. So here these are the NCAP sectors where the mitigation actions are being planned. And right now, actions are all being triggered into those individual sectors. And of course, there are challenges in terms of how much is that sector contributing and how much is the measure you have taken going to lead to that reduction. There are a lot of ifs and buts, lots of assumptions, lots of source apportionment itself. I'm not sure how effective that would be because you don't have source emission inventories, you don't have monitored data. So where from is the source apportionment coming in? And I think I also like this slide, Anumita, you should. When you have so many sources, then the percentage looks like small, but it's actually not small. And there is also these toxic elements, just not, sometimes not the particulate, but there are a lot of hydrocarbons and toxic elements in the emission hanging around. I think sometimes we saw that around 2 lakh to 3 lakh particulates are there in the air. One of our experts from Germany brought an instrument. So we were walking and he was showing that the particulates are so much. And those are all highly impactful to our health. So what we are looking into low emission zones is identify an area where you think you have a lot of sensitivities and bring everything together into one zone. That's a concept that you can visualize. So look at your transport sector, bring in your mobility solutions, your non-motorized transport solutions, pedestrianization, everything that you want to do there, along with public transport systems, last mile connectivity, parking, whatever, plus anything to deal with waste management or land use planning and management, energy sources and energy systems in the area, all that need to be brought in there. Now there is a twin win in this. It's not just about dealing with air pollution, you will also deal with improving your cityscape, because you'll bring in landscaping, you'll bring in urban designing and all that. So Mexico, which used to be one of the worst polluted cities, one of the best examples today, how they have brought up into a very good situation. PM 2.5, 200, they declare an emergency these days. And I think for us, it's a day-to-day life. And they have put in a huge effort for that. They have achieved 60% greening in the city. That doesn't mean they have 60% land under greens, but they use the existing land in multiple ways by bringing in different schemes and promoting the, for example, the rooftops of the houses, if you put greens, you get some property tax reductions, for example. So they put a concerted effort. They put a legal framework, they brought guiding framework, they made it, they brought state level laws, local level laws, and it's quite an integrated approach, a huge effort. And you will see a city beautiful because there is a lot of landscaping, urban designing, all those elements that make every little corner look so nice. And I think that's a win thing. So what we looked at is, can we bring this concept into some place like Bhubaneswar? Because that's a touristic place, religious place. There are beautiful monuments, and these are so nice. And when people want to change it, it's an opportunity for us to change it for better. In fact, we heard that there is a heritage plan in the area coming up. Then we said we should then recreate it in a manner that you get a benefit for your air pollution, bring in all the other solutions into the place. They already have actually green mobility solutions there, electric buses, public transport put in the overall area. But we said you choose this area and bring everything in there, be it renewables, be it waste management, be it mobility solutions into that place. So we discussed this with all the different departments concerned. And incidentally, all the departments have some action plan with them in terms of implementing something or the other. So we told them, can you divert and prioritize your actions for this area? And most of them said yes. Now the question will be, how do we then integrate that? How do we position it and visualize it? Because money is being spent by every department, somewhere or the other. So it's a question of coordination, integration, and putting it in a way that you get a visible impact. So often we are finding difficulties in visualizing what has happened since 2019, the launch of the National Clean Air Program. Can you really see any positive impact? But you can see a lot of measures implemented. But does it really give you a reduction? Some cities have reported quite a lot of reduction in pollution. But if you ask the citizens, do you see something? Most probably the answer is no, because they cannot feel it. And you cannot measure it. I think that was also one point which, Anamika, I liked your point of saying, we also need an evidence to show that it actually helped. If there was someone suffering from some health impact, has that person now been in better situation? No, we don't know. So now this low emission zone concept has been there already worldwide. There are more than 260 low emission zones, 250 of them in Europe itself. So I just here showed you, they're all here. I'll give you a few examples of what they did. For them, since many cities in Europe actually have land use planning, master planning, they're quite strict about it. So there are their own mobility plans, transportation plans, land use plans and all. So they focus right now on only mobility, transport in their low emission zones, most probably. So they have gone into restriction of polluting vehicles, cleaner modes of mobility, usage of public transport, and overall to look at air quality improvement. That was the major focus. But for India, I thought that was not going to work for us because there are a lot of other interconnected issues. No? Only mobility cannot give you this visible impact. Like in Delhi, if if the impact is 500 meters and if major population segment of the population is living in that, what will you get if you don't deal with those elements? Now, London has declared low emission zones, ultra low emission zones, and congestion charge zones. That's one approach dealing with transport. In a low emission zone, you have certain restrictions, like they restricted any large commercial vehicle Euro 6, beyond Euro 6. So they restricted only that. But in ultra emission zones, it can be Euro 4 or higher for petrol or Euro 6 for diesel. And in the case of congested charge zones, they see congestion. So any vehicle entering into that zone will have to pay something. So they don't want to encourage vehicles to go there. So that's applicable for any kind of vehicle going into that. So they have also identified for ultra emission zones, it is 24/7, except Christmas and New Year, some exemption. But for example, for the congestion charge zone, they put 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. weekends, and so on. So they made their own ways of ensuring how they regulate that. Now, in the case of Madrid, Spain, they have a sticker system in the low emission zone, and they have, in the case of London, they have cameras, and this is automatic fines. Camera read by the plates, and you get automatically the fines for that. In the case of Madrid too, it's camera based, and there too need stickers, and the stickers will Euro 3 for petrol and Euro 4 for diesel. That's how they did it. In case of Berlin, they have a sticker placed on the windscreens, and the police check it manually. And so they have in place till since 2010. They allow only the green sticker cars, the cars which follow Euro 3 or better. And so they have restrictions for others. There would be fines. The fines can be as much as 80 euros for defaulters, 100 pounds in London for defaulters. So they're hefty fines if you exceed that. So that's the one in Spain, and that's in Germany, where you have these sticker systems. And in Portugal, also there is a similar low emission zone, which is divided into two zones. One is for a medium standard and one is for a minimum standard. So they have again a sticker system for that. Yeah, so this we discussed in Bhubaneswar with officials, and whether you want to do something like this, because enforcement of these vehicular restrictions is always cumbersome. Yeah, and right off way, Jagan, what you said. In fact, I used to say, even in my first job, public sector and government should set an example before you ask others to set an example. So there should be no right of way for government vehicles who do not comply. They are the ones who should invest and do it, first of all, before they ask others to do it. So this is something not understandable to me. In fact, it came in headlines when my first job of 3 months joining, when I said, there was a distillery causing pollution. I said, it's a public sector, you must set an example before you ask others, SMEs, to do something around it. So yeah, so this is something that we need to work on that. And I think on a benefit side, we have seen in Bhubaneswar, for example, the e-mobility and women transgender being roped into employment and the jobs being given. Now in Surat, they're getting into electric mobility, and there are some skilling that being done for women drivers and other women jobs being created under that. So there is always a win-win situation there. We need always to look at the benefit side, not just on the clean air, but there are multiple benefits for your economic growth of the city, for your streetscapes, for your urban designing. So there are these, I think there are many examples these days in the master plans, walk to work concept. Yeah, so that has to be an integral part. Unless you do that, how would they do it? Accessibility is another issue. And these non-motorized transport infrastructure. In fact, we were working on IT park in Hyderabad. So there are a lot of enthusiastic employees who use bicycles. They use expensive bicycles though. But then they said it saves them the gym time and exercise time because they can use this as a way to come. But of course, they need then washrooms in the offices. They need parking for their car, cycles, and all that. So we talked to their companies, and the companies were more than willing to make those kind of provisions. But what was not working is the street dogs and cattle, which are a worry for them when they come on the roads. There is no separate bicycling lanes, and junctions is another major risk for them. So they were also expressing their difficulties. But a lot of IT companies said, yes, we would like to have 25% of our employees to use bicycles. But of course, that's easy to say. But there are a lot of other things. While there is a willingness, but I think here there is a lot of infrastructural overhaul required to make that happen really. And reliable and safe public transport is another thing. And I've seen these smart public transport systems in Bhubaneswar. Kroot has done, I think, quite a good job there. These are all opportunities for us. The last mile connectivity, we see there are a lot of these vehicles these days coming up. Parking is generally discouraged because parking, there's a lot of debate about parking. Should we really have parking? Because parking means you're encouraging private cars. But nevertheless, you will still have. What we saw is that parking, if it's not properly designed, can increase 20 to 30% pollution locally. So it's very important for us to really make a proper design for parking. Sometimes it is just about the display of availability of parking and the location of parking, entry exits, the layout inside the parking, all those different things are complex. No? So there are this park and ride. So in Germany, you have for freight movement a similar thing, park and ride kind of a thing. So they have created freight villages outside the cities. Then inside the city, you have hierarchies of mobility for the freight transport. So I think this is all requiring infrastructure overhaul. It's not just about regulations and restrictions of pollution control and emissions and so on. A lot more needs to be thought about. So low emission zones, I can imagine, can be done in touristic spots in the cities, can be done in institutional campuses. You can do in business districts. There are a lot of opportunities to do that. It can actually promote your tourism, can promote your business, can exemplify and make life easier for people to commute and to have a better quality of life. So please look at that. If we look at more from the imposing side, that is something that people will try to bypass and will not be able to comply for multiple reasons. But if you make it promotional, if you make it better for life, I think that will sell easily. And a lot of it has to come in the public infrastructure planning. It's not just about imposing things on the private owner all the time. So it's everything to be done into, like I said, the park, bicycling is a glaring example. People want to use it, but they have no possibility to do it because of lacking infrastructure. So I'm just giving here, there are a lot of things being done in terms of banning, restricting, odd events and all that. But that's one part of management strategy. But please think about when you are working on traffic, the green mobility solutions and clean air, please have a broader perspective. You can have short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions, easy to do, difficult to do, low cost, high cost, all those permutation combinations. We have to do everything else. But as I also said, we are not alone. There are multiple agencies working on that. There are a lot of think tanks, there are experts, there are manufacturers, investors, service providers. There are a lot many people who are associated. I think we need to work together with all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghu. And I'll now request Sharif, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jagan, and thanks to the organizers. Clearly, the pressure is on me to make this Mobilogue rather than a conference or a session speaking on topics. The promise is I have just 7 slides and try to wrap up in 7 minutes. And, of course, Terry work is out there. People know about some of the work. I'll showcase some of the implemented work that we have done in terms of success stories that we have achieved. So we are into working on modal shift strategies in railways. Public transport and electric buses is something that we are currently working on. Fuel economy norms, of course, with Amit and the other key stakeholders who are involved in. We are working on the clean freight. We heard about scope 3 emissions earlier in the presentation. So that's where the clean freight program is plugged. We are working in the EV segment and, of course, the biodiesel and other strategies that to look at for decarbonizing transport. I'll be touching upon the urban freight concept and how it is responsible or accounts for different problems at the city level. Be it from the air pollution, local air pollution, be it from the noise level pollution. GHG emissions, traffic congestion is an important. Many cities have, in fact, gone ahead, and we have heard in the LEZ concept as well about banning of certain segment of vehicles, and these particular vehicles bear the brunt. The first segment to be banned as such, and therefore, it needs to be, a lot of livelihood also depends on this particular segment. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that banning would not, it could solve certain problem for certain time, but may not solve a long-term strategy on air pollution. Of course, the accident and the fatalities, we haven't heard about the accidents that are happening. 50% is happening in the urban areas, about 50% on national highways. This is an important topic to also be considered. And there are risks associated with it while we are transitioning to alternative fuels as well. I'll come to it as well. So this is the conceptual, I have borrowed it from one of the research papers. The framework for sustainable urban freight transport. And there are different systems in place, the activity system where the vehicles are moving, the logistics are happening. And you have the transportation systems in place where you have the, transport nuggers and the warehouses and all those systems infrastructure in place. I think the important point here is to integrate and look at it at a holistic nature of it while doing the planning, and some of the points which we can draw from this is listed in the last slide. I'll come to it. Looking at how these proper planning activities could benefit eventually. Certain initiatives were undertaken, especially by GIZ, and we were part of it earlier. But happy to also hear that some of those strategies will be now going forward in certain cities in Karnataka and other states as well. EV growth story, we have all been hearing about this from the urban freight perspective, and that's the success story, and it's one of the key contributors to the EV success story in India as well, where we see large deployment of three-wheelers in this particular segment, which are catering to our quick commerce delivery, normal deliveries as well, which is also catering to a large segment of the the food deliveries that we get. Those are also in the two-wheelers. Those are in that segment is also creating a lot of positives for the success of EV segment in India. The table below shows the scenarios that we have. So currently in 2021, which is the baseline scenario that we have done in our modeling work, we see that the penetration of three-wheeler and in other segments are near zero. We see significantly higher now in 23, 24. And based on the success that we have seen in the past 3-4 years, particularly, we do envisage that about 30%, which is the ambition for India, could be achieved by different segments, particularly in the LGV and the MHGV segment. And while doing one of the studies for urban freight and speaking to some of the OEMs, we had more of a conservative share of three-wheelers, but based on their market understanding, they were quite upbeat, and they mentioned about 90% of their three-wheeler that would be registered by 2030 could be electrified, and we see that happening in a great way. We are talking, and the last column on this table talks about the overall vehicle stock and not just the sales part of it. So that's important to capture, because most of the 88% of these vehicle stocks would be running on the conventional fuels, particularly diesel in the commercial vehicle segment. And if the cities ban it on CNG, again, it's not green altogether as compared to electric vehicles. Small slide on topic on the batteries that we have in the tropical nature. The three-wheelers, as we see, and that's the difference what we see in the European countries or the US, the North American countries, is the battery capacity size. Here we are typically having a battery capacity size of 7 to 13 for a three-wheeler electric, which is fairly low. And for a four-wheeler segment, which is in the MHGV and in the four-wheeler, it's about 17 to 50. Still, it's very low as compared to the European countries, and therefore, and the other differentiating factor while talking about electrification in the freight segment is about the tropical nature of our country and the environment. I think it has got a lot of implication on how vehicles perform, how the challenges emerge for the drivers and the users of these vehicles, I think we should be cognizant of this fact as well. A lot of research R&D work is being done on this particular activity, and a lot of money spent by the OEMs themselves as well. Just two strategies and some of the work we see that happening, although in very small scale and very less impactful at this stage right now, but I think that's the way we should proceed going forward. From local to hyperlocal in terms of how we can talk about LEZs, where only certain vehicle segments, particularly electric vehicles for deliveries and other activities could be allowed. And from local to macro, which talks about the CMP and the Clean City Logistics Plan, where a lot of land use integration needs to be done. Transport Nagars, we have seen in the last slide how Berlin is doing a complete overhaul of their infrastructure system out of the city. We have faced it here as well. If we have seen city developments for the past 30, 40 years back, some of the warehouses that or the terminals and the transport nagars that we had planned, which are right now within the city ambit. So I think a lot of efficiencies need to be on how we can utilize the existing infrastructure in a better way, something that we need to work on, instead of designing an altogether a new hub per se, which is a very difficult exercise altogether. We have been hearing about multimodal logistics parks as well. Clearly, we have got very limited success on that front. Some of the MMLPs that have come up are working at a below capacity kind of utilization levels. So I think clearly the learnings are there. We need to amplify in terms of what the best practices could be specific for Indian conditions and Indian operations. So I've listed it down here quickly on some of the work that we have been doing. We did some work on with Coca-Cola for their last mile deliveries, and happy to report that some of the, particularly in Lucknow, they have deployed electric vehicles for their last mile deliveries. We have come up with the rail green points. Why is this important is that just a few days back, we got to inform that some of the e-commerce companies who are moving their cargo on railways are asking for these kind of certificates to leverage on their business models and their business penetration as well. So I think this clearly talks about how at different levels, different forces are working on move towards a sustainable mode of transport as well. A small example on the Delhi Metro initiative of Carbon Light. It's an awareness kind of initiative where a passenger, and we are looking at, it's just limited to the paper tickets right now. DMRC is now looking to expand it to further other segments as well in terms of card users and all. You'll get the notification as how much of carbon savings you have done based on the travel distance you have made. Very happy to report on the work that we have done for India Post. And Jagan, you mentioned about science driving action. I think initially, and we followed the Newton's first law of motion here. Initially, there were a lot of resistance to this particular, and a lot of question marks were there for us to answer. Happy to report now that in the last month itself, India Post has purchased electric vehicles. They are going now electric. With this particular exercise that we have done for the past 1 year or so. Now the effort would be to scale it up and bring it to a scale which would have a greater impact on local air pollutions. The other driving factor would be the crowding in factor of government. When the government vehicles are there on road and those are electric, people see it, people tend to then believe it that yes, this is one of the solutions that they can trust and go for. I think that's another message that is coming from this particular exercise that we are doing. One interesting, while we are talking to some of the drivers who are using these electric trucks, was that we tried to understand their initial thoughts on driving an electric vis-a-vis a diesel truck. And the interesting answer that came on, and we were very concerned what would that concern would be, from the drivers who are driving these vehicles. The first concern that they mentioned and was that pickup is really fast. I then was kind of amused itself. That's a concern, that's a good concern to have, because most of us would like to start on a high speed, and takeoff is quite good for electric vehicles. Those who are driving electrics would experience that. But yeah, all positive so far. And we are now looking at scaling it up, as said earlier. That's all from my side. Thank you, Jagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. Wonderful. So this is just a shout out to all of our participants online. We are going to have a panel discussion, and do please stay. So with that in mind, let me set the ball rolling. There's a lot that has been said. Each of the presenters have shared a rich range of observations, insights, as well as ideas about what needs to be done. So I think we should avail of this unique opportunity to get all of these experts to reflect on a few things. I was trying to figure out what would be a good lead-in question, and I thought perhaps what would be useful is for us to actually address something that Amit said, which is that we need more ambitious policy scenarios. And at some fundamental level, by talking, as Amit did, about land use, transport, plus energy integration, Anumita talked about the TOD culture. Also, Raghu reinforced the point about area-based development and how areas give us the opportunity. And Anumita also talked about the area-based development. These opportunities for actually doing the integration and convergence. I think probably we are at a good point now for us to actually take that leap towards much more ambition in terms of policy. So let me start with that question, and please feel free to jump in and let's have a lively discussion. Let me start with that question to Amit. To start with, Amit, since you brought it up, what do you think is an ambitious policy scenario? And please just speculate on what it could be.
Thanks, Jagan. And I think and this also comes across what kind of Raghu presented, and also Anumita and Sharif presented. So right now, if you look at a lot of policies are tailored towards how do you do more good, right? If I may use the word, which is how do you more incentivize electric vehicles? How do you incentivize more cleaner transport? So a lot of is pushing about doing good. But we also have to be ambitious that we also have to stop the bad part of it. And which becomes tricky, right? So for example, if you take a Lalizet conversation, if you say, I want to stop all the polluting vehicle, then it becomes very difficult conversations. Because then what happens to the fleet replacement, what happens to the livelihood, what happens to a lot of other issues which come in. And that requires a little bit of planning. So I think from transport side, what we believe are very good policies, because right now if you look at electrification story, there's a lot of conversation, do we have enough money to convert all these vehicles to electric? Absolutely not. Because you can never have that money, right? But can you convert these vehicles to electric without money? Absolutely you can. And so this is where I think some of these kind of demand supply side policies come in, which is, can we have some targets for OEMs to sell electric? Can we also have some thinking of when do we want to phase out ICE? Because Europe has come up with a very specific target by 2035 you want to phase out. Because once you came up with this direction, it sets the ball rolling that long term this is our vision, and then the OEMs and the ecosystem aligns itself to achieve this vision. Otherwise, a lot of back and forth which happens does not give that result.
Great, thanks Amit for starting us off on that. Let me turn to Anumita. Anumita, firstly, you can of course respond to what Amit said, but also what you presented in your presentation was, in a sense, the NCAP, is NCAP working? Is the 15 Finance Commission incentives working? Are the CPCB indicators working? I mean, if you take just these three big sort of reference points, then it seems that they are mistargeted or inadequate, or perhaps in the case of the CPCB indicators, which I think was revelatory, not possible to actually achieve. In that scenario, what Amit is saying about more ambition, is more ambition going to be about simpler targets, or is more ambition going to be about greater scope of intervention?
Absolutely. So, what I would say is that to build ambition, to have a target is very important. And the fact that today NCAP is saying and that this is the target for reduction. But what we are not being able to do adequately is to apportion that target to subsectors and understand what is really needed in the subsectors to build scale and build speed. So it's not that nothing is happening. You have electric buses, you have some non-motorized transport, you have some walking cycling paths happening, but they are not adding up. So the whole challenge is that how do you build scale, and whether for that you have mandate. And what Amit is saying, that to be able to, you may have regulations, policies, but if you do not have binding targets and enabling institutions, funding strategies, aligning funds, so all the entire ecosystem will have to be worked out to enable this. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And also, when I say target, it looks like it's easier to have targets in the technology sector rather than design sector. So the transportation mobility is a very design-rich intervention. It's very tough to say, like in electric vehicle, you can say, okay, you have so many percentage of vehicles as electric. But now when I'm saying so many kilometers of, or so much of area of LEZ or pedestrian ways or cycling paths, first of all, this is pretty much outside the capacity of the departments to design. Secondly, we have not really understood how do you enable its implementation. And all the departments are absolutely clueless. Now, therefore, new generation interventions, which are more design oriented, we have to think through how do you do that. And that's why when people begin to prioritize and say, let's look for a simpler solution, then what happens is you invariably land up with some of the technology fixed solutions. So I'll just give you one example that even in NCAP right now, they're thinking about this next lap. They're coming up with something called Champion Fund to incentivize cities to implement some of the key priority strategies. Now, if you look at what is getting contemplated in the vehicle sector, then it is about scrappage center for old vehicles. It is about the emission monitoring, pollution monitoring centers for vehicles, or to say that cities to give a target when they are going to phase in the electric vehicles. So clearly, we all want electric vehicle to happen, but they are not realizing that electric bus or electric vehicle, they need to be thought through within the mobility ecosystem. But there is no capacity to make that linkage. But priority is technology still for them without understanding the mobility connection. I think that's where we really need to intervene now.
Thank you. Yeah, Sharif, do you want to jump in?
Just one point to add to Anmita also mentioned about the easy way out of getting these fund allocated, and one of the easy ways to deploy mechanical sweeping machines on road, whether the city requires it or not, whether those these vehicles are performing in the objective of being done or not. Terry did one study on the audit of these vehicles in the NDMC area, and clearly the message that is coming out is not in favor of these vehicles per se. I think the report is already online and people can refer to it. But this is one area where a lot of effort and money is being spent, but actual utilization, effective utilization is there or not is something that is questionable right now. Yeah.
Thanks. Anumita, just to pick up from your point, and I want to address a question to Raghu. Raghu, you mentioned just in passing right at the end that in your first job you were looking at departmental vehicles themselves being polluting, right? somewhere to me, there is a connection with the ecosystem approach that Anumita talked about, and the ability for us to call to action or demand accountability from government departments. Can you complete that story for us? Where did that lead to?
Right. About the vehicles, it was about a distillery that was a public sector distillery right on the beaches of Pondicherry, polluting beaches. And at that time, people were talking about industries. Most of the industries in Pondicherry were MSMEs, and that it should be regulated, controlled, and all that. So my question was that you have a public sector enterprise which is spoiling the entire beach. Why don't you control that first of all before you can demand anything from outside? That anyway we were doing it as a pollution control agency. So the government took it up, actually took it up. Once we said this, they took it up. And they even started looking around, relocating it to some other place. I think it's a question of attitude, because government is again made of people. It's the people to have a vision for it. So if people have thought, why should I do, let others do, it will be like this. So government never said, if we will not do it. Government never said we will use only old and polluting vehicles. Who told that? Never. You will see very nice cars on the roads of Delhi, expensive cars of Delhi, government cars. So it's not that the government has restricted you in any manner. It's the officers who need to get oriented and then say, let me set a good example for the rest. That is what my point is. Yeah.
Okay, great. That brings us to capacity building, and I think that's the sort of the elephant in the room, and it's also the focus of the Sumaka and Mobilogue program. In this context of capacity building, we can start with you, Raghu. Where can we show greater ambition on capacity building? I mean, clearly the individuals will make the difference, like people in the government, businesses, industries. How do we build an ecosystem-wide capacity?
Right. Yeah, I would answer this in multiple ways. One is just to take the connection with the policy part. So when we set the policy, when we look at pollution control agency or when we look at the Ministry of Environment, they'll look at more from the regulatory side, because they set the standards, the limits, and they want to make sure the limits are complied with. But who is preventing anyone to make a sound master plan? Master plans are not made by the regulators. Why did Delhi not make a master plan that takes care of pollution, takes care of Yamuna, takes care of waste, takes care of everything else? No, who prevents us from that? And you have professional planners sitting in these organizations and the ministries. Who prevented them? Similarly, there are ministries dealing with heavy vehicles and public transport and vehicle manufacturing. Now, who prevented them to implement that? Yeah, so I would look at, it's not always look at the regulatory side and pose questions to them that you didn't have that, you didn't do this, but rather it's a collective responsibility of everyone. It's not pollution control agency alone. No, everyone else has to do that. Now, that's one part for me. Now, what is missing in that? We did an exercise several years back asking the development authorities we were training, who are the influencers that make a good or a bad city? So they gave us a list of actors who are good or bad. That included planners, politicians, media, research organizations, and so on. So then we we asked them.
These were the good people.
No, these were actors.
Oh, they were just actors.
Then we asked them, who is influencing whom? Mark 1, 2, 3. How much is a media influencing a planner? 1, 2, 3. 3 is max, 1 is 1, 0 is inert. And how much is a politician influencing a good or a bad city? And how much is a media influencing? So we made a matrix and we put in a graph. The researchers went into the zero corner, the inert corner, because research seems to have no influence on anything. And who went into the active, most active were vested interests and politicians, and media also to some extent. Now, who are in the inert zone? The planners and the development authorities. And this was not our data. They themselves put the data, but I put in the graph, they said we want to change our answers now. Yeah, so I think there are multiple actors responsible for our life to be made better in the cities, be it pollution, be it mobility, be it everything else. And there are a lot of players in the market. You need to give opportunities and provisions, first of all. So there are multiple. So there are policymakers, there are media people, there are researchers, there are a whole lot of people involved. Now, from our side, yeah, it's important for us to get the skills and to get the understanding. So you have the National Skill Qualification Framework, which I like very much, because that gives a very good basis of jobs, responsibilities associated with the job, and the qualification required to perform a job. And I think that formula we have been using all through.
Okay.
So right now, we have been assigned by the Ministry of Environment to give training to all the key agencies involved in implementation and CAP, starting from nodal officers of the Central Pollution Control Board, nodal officers of the cities, state pollution control boards, sectoral ministries, all that. So we are finding, so one is your target group. The other thing is, what is that they need to be trained on? And the third thing is, how is the training going to be given? Many times I see training is a lecture by a couple of people, and I don't think you are able to get the skill that you want to get there. Maybe you make them aware of certain things. So I think this whole capacity building needs to be seen in a larger perspective. And one more point that before I close my view on this, we call it GIZ capacity development, not just capacity building. Capacity development goes beyond capacity building of people. No, it goes into policies, organizations, processes, structures, all that. So I think we need to work on this holistic approach, which would also include your financial frameworks and all the other things that I mentioned. And I saw one city that did it so far well. That's Mexico.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe just in the interest of time, because we're coming to a close, I'll just run down the table. And if you could address this question about capacity building.
No, absolutely. I think this is very vital. A couple of things which came up to my mind. I think one, as Raghu mentioned, that researchers were in the corner, right? Why were they in the corners? Because if you look at our, when I studied, and still I go and teach a school of planning and architecture, we never talk about politics of planning. And cities are very contested spaces. You can't have a research without getting into the politics and understanding how things move. So I think we'll have to look at, even at the education system, how do we bring in more of these conflicting conversations, because it's not easy. It's a very highly contested space. So I think that is something we have to look at. But on the other side, I think one of the big issues with capacity building is a lot of times it's very sporadic. We do one workshop, one event, one seminar, one webinar, the check mark is done. But how do we evaluate how much of this has contributed to actually building capacity? So I think if we have to come up with slightly more long-term, rigorous methods of capacity building, we have to maybe create some kind of institutes which can drive this. Otherwise, it will be very one-off event and not substantive action will happen.
Okay, thank you. Anumita, please.
Is that capacity building will require some kind of mandate for departments. We have seen that, say, in the case of when Delhi for the first time started talking about parking management area plan, nobody in the SDMC or municipality had a clue about what it is. But when the Supreme Court said, no, you'll have to do these pilots, we found the SDMC taking the lead, sourcing their knowledge, bringing in designers, the right consultants, and creating the capacity to be able to do that. So capacity building in isolation really doesn't happen. Second, what we need is to have a good method of sourcing knowledge, and the knowledge ecosystem, which has to be driven not only by the consultants, knowledge givers, and research bodies outside the system, but you have to create knowledge ownership within the system. So otherwise, you'll have these piled up reports in the departments, you make it, but they never inform action. So that's the third one. And the other is that you need to have very verifiable, monitorable progress monitoring so that there is an accountability established. Today, we never talk about capacity building to this extent for finance ministry. They know how to do the budget because they have to just do it, right? But for the mobility sector, there is no such thing that you have to do it. So we have to create that first, the mandate and the capacity, and we know how to build capacity. But whether the system is going to get disciplined enough to do the capacity, bring the capacity, source capacity, and align the capacity with real implementation on ground, which is monitorable and accountable, that's the system approach that we have to move towards.
Thank you. Sharif.
Yeah, I think the common line of thought is there. I mean, we do need a fundamental change in the capacity development aspect of, and we have seen it in most of these capacities, and the focus in the planning aspect is on the infrastructure creation and not on how you are managing and maintaining these infrastructure. I think those things should also be taken, especially in a scenario where we are facing heat effect, extreme heats in the north, cyclonic events in the coastal regions, and other climate-induced environmental aspects, disasters that we are facing in India right now. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. I have to draw this to a close and give Rana a few minutes to close the entire session. So I think for our remaining 42 online participants, we would like to leave you with just a few closing thoughts. And I think we've had some very stimulating discussions here, lots of very rich presentations, and a few closing thoughts about takeaways. I guess capacity building, of course, is a key takeaway, and itself requires a nuanced and comprehensive and integrated kind of approach. The other is about ambition and defining ambition such that we are actually following an ecosystem approach, to use Anumita's word. And the fact that mandates are crucial. You have to mandate that capacity building needs to be done. You should not need a Supreme Court or a High Court to crack the whip. Departments themselves have to do this, but not to do it in a routine way. So we need to also devise new formats, more effective ways in which capacity building is delivered, and perhaps Mobilogue is itself part of that sort of innovation in capacity building. And I would say in particular that the closing point for me is, in fact, also defining the scope. This has to be done very carefully. Sometimes it's a department, sometimes it's an area, sometimes it's a city or an entire sector. What is it that you're dealing with? What is your ecosystem and how big is it? Should be a key question that we all ask ourselves before we actually start interventions. And with that, I think I'll draw this to a close. And yeah,
we have a couple of questions. Actually, we have
Okay.
7 to 8 questions from the audience. I'll just post a couple. So one of them is, considering the electricity generation of India is largely dependent on coal, which is directly linked to huge carbon emissions. Are we really envisaging the reduction of carbon emissions through electrification of mobility systems? This question has come from 2 people, Shrishti and Vinay Kumar. And yeah, there's an additional add-on to it. Average life of batteries is 8 to 10 years. The decomposing of batteries is also a big concern at the moment. And are we just looking at reduction of carbon emissions with respect to roads and transport, or do we need to look at the big picture as well, considering the Mother Earth as a single ecosystem?
Wow. Amit,
Yes, very quickly.
Fastest finger first.
Absolutely. Because I was feeling slightly unwell because this question was not asked. Because every time I present this question, one question absolutely comes every time. What do we do when we have... So the answer is, even with predominant energy coming from coal, electric vehicles are cleaner because the electric induction motor is a much more efficient mode of machinery than an internal combustion engine. But as you clean the grid, it will only get cleaner. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. That was a crisp answer.
Can we get one more question in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This question is actually on the e-bus seva scheme, previously FAME 2. And the question is that how are high floor electric city buses, which excludes people who are disabled or pregnant persons, elderly, etc., and why are the disabled constantly excluded from transport and urban planning discourse, which results in odd even disability advocacy?
One clarification is PM e-bus seva is not a FAME 2 scheme. These are 2 separate schemes. So that's one. And I think the electric buses which are coming in are, I'm looking at more at low floor buses. So they are much more disabled friendly than the old 900-meter high diesel or CNG buses.
I think that's all. We have a few more, but we'll share these with you and you can
Wonderful.
comment on them.
So over to you, Rana.
Thank you, Mr. Jagan and the esteemed panelists for an insightful session. Before we conclude, it's time for post-webinar polls. It'll help us shape the future Mobilogues 2.0 sessions based on the needs. Request you all to please scan the QR code on the screen and answer the questions. Okay, so we have the results. Advocacy and policy making leads. I think there are some more changes happening. Okay, so advocacy and policy making leads, followed by academic or research purposes. Thank you so much. Okay, we have another question.
I guess the first one is all people sitting here.
Great. So, of course, the expert insight and experiences is the leading response for this. Now we have another question.
So next 4 topics are decided.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your feedback. We'll definitely incorporate this in the coming Mobilogue sessions. And before we conclude, it's time to acknowledge that today is World Environment Day, and the launch of Mobilogues 2.0 is perfectly timed for that. We would like to take a moment to express our gratitude to our esteemed panelists for their valuable contributions to today's discussion. I would request Zora to come on stage and hand over the memento to all the panelists, please. Thank you to our distinguished panel, the speakers, and each one of you for joining us today. Together, let's make Mobilogue 2.0 a platform for driving positive change and building a more sustainable future. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and see you all at the next Mobilogue 2.0 session on trends and challenges in urban mobility on 25th of June, 2024. Thank you, everyone.